Hello everyone, and welcome to CogNosco and Ascolto, the official scientific podcast of CogNosco Lab. This podcast series highlights our research in cognitive science and artificial intelligence.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It's about how the way we use language, especially when we're talking about difficult things, it might actually be showing more than we think it is.
It's true. It's like language can be a window right into our thoughts and feelings.
Exactly.
Especially when we're dealing with something like trauma.
Yeah. And that's what's so cool about this research paper we're looking at today. It was published in Computers and Human Behavior. And it uses this really interesting technique called textual forma mentis networks.
Oh, yeah.
TFMNs for short.
Yeah, TFMNs are really powerful. They're a really powerful tool in the field of cognitive network science.
Okay, so hold on. I got to stop you right there for a second.
Sure.
What exactly is cognitive network science? It sounds super complicated.
It's actually not as complex as it sounds. It's basically a field that's trying to figure out how our minds work by looking at them as networks. Like, imagine your brain as this massive web of interconnected ideas and concepts. And that's your mental lexicon.
Okay. So is that kind of like how certain words can trigger certain memories or feelings?
Exactly. And cognitive network science basically tries to map those connections to see how all these different concepts relate to each other and how those relationships actually shape our thoughts and behaviors.
Oh, that's wild. So where do these TFMNs fit into all of this?
Well, TFMNs are like a way to visualize and analyze those networks.
Okay.
That web of interconnected ideas we were just talking about?
Yeah.
Your mental lexicon? Well, the way we use language, the words we pick and how we put them all together, that actually reflects that underlying network.
So it's like TFMNs are kind of like a map of our minds?
Yes.
But instead of like mountains and rivers, it's words and concepts?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And by studying these maps, these TFMNs, we can start to understand how people think about and process different experiences.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it now. So how did the researchers use these TFMNs to study these online narratives from sexual assault survivors?
They focused on a really specific difference in language. How survivors used active versus passive voice when they were describing their assault.
So like, I was raped versus he raped me.
Exactly. They took thousands of Reddit posts from a support community and separated them into two groups, based on whether the person mainly used active or passive voice.
Gotcha. And they found some interesting stuff, right?
They did. This is where it gets really interesting. The TFMNs showed a pretty big difference in the words and concepts that were most central to the narratives, depending on whether the person used active or passive voice.
Okay, I'm hooked now. Tell me what they found.
Well, the passive voice networks, the ones built around phrases like, I was raped.
Yeah.
Those were way more likely to have words related to psychological distress at their core.
Like what kinds of words?
Things like trauma, PTSD, anxiety, flashback. These concepts were really tightly connected to other words in the network, which suggests that there was a stronger focus on the emotional and psychological impact of the assault in these narratives.
So it's not just that those words were there, but they were more central to the way the person was thinking and talking about what happened to them.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't mean that people using active voice weren't experiencing distress.
Right.
But their narratives were structured differently.
So how so? What were the active voice narratives focused on?
Well, instead of those trauma-related words, the active voice networks were more likely to have family members at their center.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like parents, siblings.
Exactly.
Huh. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
It seems like there's a real shift in focus depending on whether the person is using active or passive voice. Could this mean that they're coping or processing the experience in different ways?
That's a great question, and it's something that researchers are definitely looking into. It's just fascinating to see how something as simple as grammar can reveal these deeper patterns in how we think and feel.
It really is.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how powerful language can be. So what else can we learn from these TFMNs? Did the researchers uncover any other interesting details?
Oh, yeah. Remember those semantic frame subgraphs we talked about?
Oh, right. Those were like little zoomed-in views of specific words and all the emotions tied to them.
Right.
Yes.
Think of them as like close-ups on specific areas of that mental map. They show us how different concepts are all linked together in terms of meaning, but also emotional weight.
So what did those close-ups show? Anything interesting?
Well, when they looked at the subgraph for rape in the passive voice networks, they found this mix of negative emotions like violence and violation, but also words related to time, like ago or recently.
So maybe those time words show a focus on the past, on the actual event.
Yeah, that's a possible interpretation. And the subgraph also had references to specific people involved, like stranger or boyfriend, and even connections to childhood.
Wow.
It's like a really complex picture of how the trauma is like woven into the person's whole mental network.
It's like each word is a thread.
Yeah.
And those threads are all tied together to make this tapestry of experience.
Exactly. And the subgraphs for sex and feeling in the passive voice networks were even more revealing.
Really?
Yeah, they were dominated by negative emotions like guilt, shame, fear.
Which could be connected to that psychological distress we were talking about before.
Potentially. It suggests that these concepts are holding a lot of emotional weight for survivors who are using passive voice. And then there's the subgraph for therapy, which is interesting.
How so?
Well, because it actually showed a lot of positive emotions.
Oh, wow.
Words like heal, helpful, recommend.
So even in these networks that are centered on trauma, there's still a glimmer of hope. A desire for healing.
That's what's so amazing about this research. It's not just about finding the negative patterns, but also seeing how people are navigating those patterns and looking for support.
Yeah, I see that. And those differences in how they use language, active versus passive.
Right.
Maybe that gives us some clues about different coping mechanisms or ways of working through the experience.
Exactly. It really shows how complex trauma is and how language can reflect those nuances.
For sure. But what about the future? Like, where can this research go from here? Could TFMNs actually be used to help people who've experienced trauma?
Now, that is the exciting part. Imagine therapists using TFMNs to analyze what their clients are saying in real time.
Wow, that's pretty advanced.
It would give them a deeper understanding of their emotional state, help them identify potential triggers and tailor the therapy even more effectively.
It's like having a window right into their mind.
Exactly. And this could go even further than just therapy. We could have AI-powered platforms that can guide people through exercises to help them reshape their mental lexicons.
So helping them process trauma and build resilience.
Exactly. It could be especially helpful for people who've experienced trauma or are dealing with really difficult emotions.
Hold on, wait. Are you saying that we could actually rewire our brains by changing how we use language?
Well, it's not that straightforward, but the research does suggest that there's a really strong two-way relationship between language and thought. The words we choose, the way we structure our sentences, it all feeds back into those mental models we create and shapes how we see and experience the world.
That's incredible. But there are ethical things to think about here.
Oh, absolutely. We need to make sure that these tools are developed and used responsibly.
Right.
We got to prioritize things like privacy, accessibility, and empowerment.
That makes sense. But the potential for positive impact is huge.
It really is. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the future.
Yeah.
But what about right now? What can we take away from this research today?
That's a great question.
Well, I think the most important thing is just being aware that our language matters. It's not just about communicating information. It's a reflection of our inner world, our thoughts, our feelings, and how we understand our experiences.
That actually reminds me of something you said earlier about how certain words can bring back specific memories or feelings. It's like our own personal dictionaries are full of emotional baggage.
Exactly.
That we might not even realize is there.
And that's where cognitive network science comes in. It helps us uncover those connections, those hidden patterns in our thinking. And that awareness can be so valuable, even without any fancy technology.
So by paying attention to the words we use, how we talk about our experiences, we can actually gain insights into our own minds.
Absolutely. It's like holding up a mirror to your mind and seeing all those connections reflected back at you, and that self-awareness, it can be a huge first step towards understanding and dealing with difficult emotions.
For sure, whether it's trauma or stress or anything else.
Exactly.
Wow. This is making me think about my own language patterns. Are there any other examples from the research that could help us understand this better?
There are. They found some really cool things about how emotions are grouped around certain words.
Oh, yeah. Like those emotional flowers we talked about earlier.
Yes. Remember, those were a way of showing which emotions were most noticeable around certain words.
I'm really curious to hear how that worked in this study.
Okay, well, for example, they looked at the emotional flowers for the words flashback and trigger.
Okay.
In both the passive and active voice networks.
Yeah.
And they found some pretty interesting differences.
What kind of differences?
Well, fear was a strong emotion that came up with both words, no matter if the person used active or passive voice.
Okay.
But the passive voice flower for flashback had way more sadness associated with it.
Oh, interesting. So maybe for those using passive voice, flashbacks aren't just scary. They also bring up a deeper sense of sadness or loss.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. And the trigger flowers showed something different.
Oh.
Both passive and active voice networks had anticipation as a main emotion, but only the passive voice network had a high level of fear along with it.
Huh. So could that mean they have a stronger sense of anxiety about things happening again or being re-traumatized?
Possibly. It's like the passive voice networks are showing more of that anticipatory fear, that dread of those triggers being set off again.
This is all so insightful, but I gotta be honest, it's a lot to take in. What's the most important thing you want listeners to remember from all of this?
Oh, it really is a fascinating thing to think about. Imagine like going to therapy and your therapist has this tool that can analyze your language right there as you're talking.
That sounds super futuristic.
Yeah, it would give them so much insight into not just what you're saying, but how you're feeling, even if you're not saying it directly. It could even help them pick up on triggers that you might not even be aware of.
So it's like having a translator for your emotions. Exactly. And this technology could be used for so much more than just therapy. Think about AI platforms that could actually help people understand and even reshape their mental lexicons.
Where you should go like personalized language interventions.
Yeah, like a guided tour through your own mind, helping you break free from those negative thought patterns and build up resilience. Especially valuable for people who've experienced trauma or are struggling with really tough emotions.
That's a pretty powerful thought. Using technology to help us heal and grow.
Yeah.
But it makes me think back to those ethical concerns we talked about earlier.
You're right to bring that up. Anything this powerful has to be approached carefully. We need to make sure that these tools are available to everyone, not just a select few.
Yeah, it would be a shame if something this beneficial only reached those who could afford it.
For sure. And privacy is super important too. We need clear rules about who owns the data and how it's being used so people feel safe and in control.
So it's all about finding that balance, right, between innovation and responsibility.
Exactly. But I really think if it's developed carefully and ethically, this technology could totally revolutionize how we approach mental health and personal growth.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've learned how language can be like a window into our minds and how new technologies might be able to use that connection to help us understand and even heal ourselves.
It all comes back to that one key idea. Language matters. The words we choose, the way we use them, it all has a huge impact on our thoughts, our emotions, and yeah, even our reality.
So pay attention to your language, everyone. What's it telling you about yourself? You might be surprised by what you discover about your own mind.
Maybe even find some new ways to navigate all the complexities up there.
That's a great place to wrap things up. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of TFMN's cognitive network science and the power of language. We'll see you next time.